Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the contributed talk session on cognitive and neural mechanisms of social behavior. And our first talk is by Philippa Johnson from Leiden University on arousal dynamics predict transitions in engagement state. There you go.
So, when you're completing a task for an extended period, you'll experience moments of distraction or fatigue. And these change the way you process information or make decisions. What we've been studying is the neural mechanisms of these switches between being engaged or disengaged in a task. The task that we've been studying is a very simple decision-making task with data from the International Brain Lab. In this task, mice see a Gabor presented on the left or the right of the screen, and they respond left or right using a small wheel. The stimulus can be presented at a range of different contrast levels, so this is a difficulty manipulation. Studying the engagement of the mice is slightly tricky, as this is an internal state of the mouse that affects their behavior but can't be directly read out from their behavior. So to address this, we use a hidden Markov model fit to whole session time courses of response times. What we assume is that there's two latent states that affect response times, and the mouse can transition between these trial by trial according to estimated transition probabilities. So what we're assuming is that response times vary as a function of this internal state, latent state of the mouse, as well as the contrast of the stimulus on a given trial, and the side of the screen on which the stimulus is presented. So if the mice indeed switch between being engaged and disengaged, what we expect to see is that they have one state in which their RTs are generally fast, and one state in which their RTs are generally slower. If we fit this model to a session, so I'm showing you one whole session of a mouse. You can see all their response times in the foreground, and in the background, we have computed what's the most likely state that the mouse is in for each trial. And what we see is that in this session, the mouse has this green state in which their RTs tend to be a bit faster, and then the purple state where the RTs tend to be a bit slower and more variable. And the mouse maintains these states for minutes at a time. And this session is, session is very representative of the whole sample in that we always see one fast RT state and one slow RT state in mice. So at this point, I have shown you that we can separate RTs into fast and slow, but perhaps I haven't convinced you that we're really capturing the engagement of the mouse. So to address that, we can look at the accuracy of the choices that the mouse makes when they're in each of these two states. And the model is not using this to fit the data, so this is an independent check that we can use. What we see is that when the mouse is in this green fast RT state, they also respond very accurately to the stimulus that's presented on the screen, which can be seen by this green steep psychometric curve. And when the mouse is in the slow purple state, they respond much less accurately. So here we conclude that we're indeed picking up the engagement state of the mice. So we can move on to the research question we're interested in, which is what might cause a switch in engagement. In answering this question, we turn to a group of subcortical neuromodulatory nuclei that project widely over the cortex. The global activity of this collection of nuclei, which I'll refer to as arousal, can be read out by looking at baseline pupil size. The relationship between arousal and engagement is fairly typical in this task, in that we see that an intermediate baseline pupil size is associated with the highest probability of being in the engaged state, and then this decreases as the pupil becomes relatively larger or smaller. So this is a replication of a very well-known result of the inverted U relationship between engagement and, arousal and performance. But if we want to test our hypothesis that arousal causes state transitions, we need to look in a bit more detail at what's happening around these transition points where an animal switches from one state to another. So now on the x-axis, I'm showing you trials relative to a switching to engagement on the left and disengagement on the right. And on the y-axis is a measure of variability of baseline pupil size. what we see is that when the animal transitions into an engaged state, there's a decrease in the variability of pupil size, and as they transition into the disengaged state, there's an increase in variability of pupil size. And this is a replication of some previous results from Halsey et al., where we've used a different task and different model to come to the same conclusions. So these results are suggestive that there is information in the pupil about upcoming state transitions. To build on this result, we are using a mean field dynamical systems approach to look for a mechanism for how arousal can cause these state transitions. We model a hypothetical population of neurons that determine the engagement state of the animal. So this neural population has two attractor states, one corresponding to engaged behavior and one corresponding to disengaged behavior. And the activity of the population evolves according to this simple equation. So at each time step, the population is pulled towards one of these attractor states and also is injected with a bit of random noise that reflects ongoing irrelevant neural activity. So what we want to know is, do any of these parameters, which change the probability of being in each of these two states and the probability of transitioning between states, do they change as a function of arousal? Some preliminary model fitting at the group level has shown that it's more likely that arousal has an effect on the overall shape of this landscape as opposed to affecting the influence of noise in the system. And this is consistent with some previous proposals about the role of neuromodulators in shaping cortical activity. As I said, this fitting was at the group level. You'll have to come to my poster to hear a bit more detail about it. But what we're really interested in doing is fitting this model within sessions to a time course of RTs and pupil, as I'm showing you here. So I'd be really interested to hear from anyone that has experience with this type of model at my poster session tomorrow. So in conclusion, we found that we can identify the latent engagement state of mice using hidden Markov models, and that switches in states are preceded by arousal-related activity. So please come find me at my poster tomorrow. If you're interested in the general question of what kind of variability is there in this perceptual decision-making task, then I recommend you also check out Isabel's poster, which is also tomorrow afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much. We have time for 2 questions. Anyone?
Hi, thank you so much. That was really interesting. And I really liked how you were able to separate these 2 states. I'm kind of interested because I also kind of around 2 corners have mouse data. And as I understand, mice kind of hang out a bit in their cage and kind of groom and do whatever. And those types of behaviors also have meaning if you're interested in them. Do you see any way to like kind of also capture that type of behavior that's responsible for long RTs with any of the techniques you're using?
So with this data set, there is video recordings of the mice's face and body throughout the task. So certainly that's something I could look for, is if in the disengaged state, they're also more likely to be grooming. There's also been a similar approach applied to more like naturalistic behavior, where mice can choose between approaching different objects, for example, and there they really are characterizing the exact behaviors that the mouse are exhibiting at a time point, and similarly use an HMM approach to put that in more global behavioral states. So I think certainly there's a lot of exciting work in that direction as well.
Any other questions?
First, a very practical question. Can the speaker be turned down a little bit to avoid the feedback? Second, this is a very cool talk. I think it's very elegant how you're modeling arousal in this way. Can you give me a little bit intuition on why you think it's like X to the 4 function, wherein arousal is required to move from an engaged to a disengaged state. Like, my intuition would be that falling from engaged to disengaged is like a decrease in arousal, but I'm curious to hear what you think about like requiring a bump in arousal to move to a lower engaged state.
I think that's a slight misinterpretation of the model. It's not that you require a bump in arousal to transition. It's you require a bump in the system to transition. And the arousal can affect the likelihood of that bump knocking you into the next state. We know that there's this quadratic relationship between arousal and performance, so things are a bit complex in mapping this model back to arousal. But yeah, maybe I'll come chat to you after and get into more detail.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello. Okay, this one's on. So now we have Dasom Kwon from SKKU, neural representation of social relationship graphs through multidimensional modeling of dynamic social interactions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Dasom. I represent neural representations of social relationship graphs through multidimensional modeling of dynamic social interactions. So, back in the 2010s, Marvel Heroes movies were everywhere. So, as we watched them, we naturally structured many kinds of information in our minds. For example, in event structures or the power of each character. But perhaps most memorable was the relational structures. So who is closed, loved, or betrayed whom. So today, we ask, how does the brain represent these social relational structures? In data science, researchers have focused on how to computationally model such graphs. A graph consists of two components: nodes representing characters or entities, and edges representing the relationship between them. So an effective format for capturing relational structures. And a common approach to construct this social graph has been to use character co-occurrence on screen. For example, if Iron Man and Captain America appear together on screen, it is assumed that a social interaction has occurred and that their connection becomes stronger. So this simple approach captures some properties of real-world social structures, such as clusterings. Neuroscience has also adopted a similar approach, binary coding social interactions in the movie and using them to predict brain responses. Other studies examined whether the brain represents unidimensional distance of social network, focusing on areas like the temporal lobe and the precuneus. But this approach has a key limitation. So do these scenes feel the same to you? So for example, the upper scenes show their friendships, while the bottom scene shows their rivalries. Yet in modeling social interactions, previous studies treated all interactions equally, so even those with clearly different emotional tone. Furthermore, in reality, social relationships are multidimensional, and their dominant axis is valence. So that's why we incorporate valence information when modeling social interactions. So in this study, we developed a model to capture how dynamic social interactions shape multidimensional representations of social relationships by extracting valence graphs. And using this model, we reconstruct these graphs from participants' brain responses during moving. To model social interactions, we extract sentiment score from each interaction using a Korean sentiment or dictionary. So for example, if a character's emotions and actions were tagged as warm and reconcile, we labeled this interaction as positive. This gave us 3 valence graphs: positive, negative, or neutral, capturing the dynamics of relationships. So in this study, 28 participants watched a Korean web drama depicting rich social interactions in the scanner, and then rated character relationships across 6 dimensions, such as friendship, love, and trusts. And these ratings served as a ground truth in our analysis. So, as I mentioned earlier, we extract character-by-character co-occurrence graphs for each time point and expanded them into multidimensional valence graphs that reflect positive, neutral, and negative social interactions. We aggregated these graphs over time and built a partial least square regression model to predict these 6-dimensional relationship ratings. And compared to a previous unidimensional co-occurrence model, a valence graph-based modeling predicted relationship ratings better, especially for the love dimension. Then what did the model's latent representations capture? Interestingly, they revealed multidimensional social relationships in the movie. For example, the first latent dimension reflected general closeness, and the second captured the friendship, clustering of 4 classmates, and the third captured romantic relationships, such as a romantic couple and unrequited love, something like love triangles. Yeah. So our model captured multidimensional structures of social relationships emerging from dynamic social interactions. Okay, we then took a step further. Does the brain encode social graphs? So using voxel-wise encoding models, we predicted brain activity from now the moment-by-moment co-occurrence graph and valence graph features. And our moment-by-moment social graphs accurately predicted brain activities in multiple brain regions, such as the later visual and temporal cortices, and the medial parts of the brain, the precuneus and the medial prefrontal cortex. Importantly, brain responses, for example, in the TPJ, STS, or precuneus, and VMPFC, showed unique contribution from valence graphs, suggesting that our multidimensional modeling framework can account for not only behavior, but also brain responses during moving. So we thus far explored how the brain recognizes moment-by-moment social interactions through our model. Next, we wondered whether the brain also represents the entire structure of social relationships in the movie, beyond just recognizing social interactions. We applied the same PLS regression model, but this time using the learned neural weight from a neural encoding model as input to predict 6-dimensional relationship ratings. The results showed successful reconstruction of social graphs across multiple brain regions. But interestingly, their latent representations were not identical. For example, the reconstructed graph from the later visual cortex mainly reflected the perceived co-occurrence dimension, whereas the one from the VMPFC reflects the love dimension, suggesting that each brain region reflects different aspects of social relationships. To summarize, we developed a framework using multidimensional valence graphs to model social interactions in the movie, identifying neural representations of moment-by-moment social graphs. We also found that the human brain represents entire social graphs during moving, with each region emphasizing different relationship dimensions. That concludes my presentation, and thank you for your attention. If you're more interested in this research or how different brain regions vary in the representational dimensionality, please stop by poster C9-3 tomorrow. Thank you.
So much. We have time for one quick question.
Thanks, that was a great talk. One clarification, so to generate the the valence graphs, the sentiment analysis was done on the spoken text of the characters while they were on the screen together?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we obtained detailed annotation of movie from the trained annotator. So they annotated, like, for example, character who is involved in social interactions and their action or emotion word. And we use them to, for example, extract the sentiment score, for example, positive, neutral, negative, something like that. Yeah.
I wonder how that would compare to the spoken text that the characters were saying.
Spoken, you mean free record?
The dialogue. No, the characters in the movie, their dialogue. Yeah.
Actually, we just used detailed annotations. Yeah, right. Thank you.
Okay, our third talk is by Georgia Turner from the University of Cambridge, a computational model of reward learning and habits on social media.
Can you see anything? Yeah, here we go. I did test it. Shall I use it? No, it's okay. Yeah? All good? Yeah. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about a computational model of reward learning and habits on social media. So we can think of the wide range of methods to understand human cognition as falling maybe simplistically along a spectrum from very controllable methods, like at the extreme end, simulations where you've controlled everything that's going to happen, to increasingly but more ecologically valid but less controllable things like animal experiments and then also human experiments in the lab. But what I'm going to talk about today is a project that is on the very extreme end of the spectrum, so maximally ecologically valid, and instead using real-world behavior and seeing if we can understand human cognition by directly looking at this naturalistic data. So I think the reason that this hasn't not been popular until now is because it's only recently that people have started to leave the digital footprints that allow us with the granularity and scale of data on their behavior that we can track. And excitingly, that is going to allow us now to start asking if we can bridge across these different methods and see whether findings from the lab translate to the real world, and also understand the extent to which real-world behavior is driven by these cross-species mechanisms we've identified in the lab. And what better way to do that than with computational modeling? So the modeling method that we've used here is called reinforcement learning, which is an algorithm which allows an agent to learn to take actions in their environment which maximize the reward that they can gain. So one way in which reinforcement learning has been studied in animals is in traditional lab rat experiments, where a lab rat can learn to press a lever in a laboratory to gain a reward, like a primary reward, like food. And it's been shown that in accordance with optimal reinforcement learning principles, lab rats will typically press the lever more quickly when there's higher amounts of reward available. And then when there's less food reward available in the environment, they'll start behaving more slowly because it's not worth the increased effort of behaving fast anymore. So recently, people have been thinking about whether these exact same basic learning principles might also generalize to social media. So if instead in social media we think about the agent being the person using their phone, the action is learning to post on their phone, and then the rewards they're getting are social rewards like likes on social media. And so here we would ask, does the agent learn to adjust the speed at which they post in order to match the amount of rewards in the environment? So post more quickly when there seem to be more rewards that they're getting in the environment. So the first study to really test this in the real world was this 2021 study. And they showed that indeed, on Instagram, people's posting latency is really well characterized by this simple reinforcement learning framework. However, work after that on social media has shown that this simple model-free reinforcement learning algorithm, unsurprisingly, isn't the only behavioral process driving posting on social media. So what they found was that while some users showed this kind of relationship shown by the red line, which is an inverse relationship between posting latency and rewards, as predicted by reinforcement learning, people who reported having stronger habits and also posted more frequently didn't seem to show this basic signature of reinforcement learning, which suggests that for these social media users, there's maybe a different behavioral system which is more prominently driving their behavior, which we might think of as a habit system. So we set off to see if we could come up with a computational model which would allow us to characterize the relative contribution of these different systems, the reinforcement learning and the habit, across individuals, and if we could infer from people's raw Twitter data what those cognitive processes were for them. So in order to do so, we got a large Twitter data set, which constituted people's posting times on Twitter and the amount of likes that they got on each post. And we developed all our models on a discovery sample and then pre-registered the whole analysis pipeline and replicated it on a randomly partitioned confirmatory sample. So each of the models, we fitted 7 models, which I'll take you through quickly now. And importantly, each of the models is basically calculating the way in which an agent, which models a social media user, decides how fast to post. So their policy is the posting latency that they decide to do each time. And we began with 2 basically baseline models, which just posited, respectively, either a fixed policy over time, so they posted at the same rate across the data set, or a gradually changing policy, so it allowed for a change, but without modeling a cognitive process. We then had 5 cognitive models, and those included, which I'll take you through in more detail on the next slide, but they included basically a pure habit model, so assuming only habit is driving their posting latency. 2 pure reinforcement learning models, so it's assuming each of these assume a pure reinforcement learning mechanism, either with 1 reward learning rate or 2 different learning rates for positive versus negative prediction errors. And finally, corresponding to those 2 different reinforcement learning models with 1 or 2 learning rates, we had 2 hybrid reinforcement learning and habit models. So I'll take you through the most complex hybrid model because each of the simpler models are nested within that. So we first had the habitual component within an agent in an environment, which here is which the habitual policy model is just that component. And so the habitual controller basically calculates this variable called H, which we would denote habitual tendency, which is basically a recency-weighted average past actions. So it's basically this intuition that you're just repeating the actions that you tended to do in the past, with this free parameter, which can vary across individuals, the action learning rate, governing the extent to which you weight more recent actions more highly in that habitual tendency. We then had a pure reinforcement learning component, which is this goal-directed component. So here, the controller is calculating the expected reward, so that's the expected amount of likes on each post, parameterized by a reward learning rate. And then your policy is, again, capturing that inverse relationship so that the higher expected reward, the shorter your posting latency policy, so the quicker it's telling you to post. And then finally, in our hybrid models, we had a third component, which was just an action arbiter, which combined the policies from these 2 underlying components with a weighted average governed by the habit weight, which is a free parameter varying across individuals, which governs the weighting of the habitual policy in the system. And then the final posting latency is just probabilistically determined by that policy. So we first found that comparing across the 7 models, the 2 hybrid models, so with different amounts of learning rates, provided the best explanation of the data, suggesting that this hybrid process is governing posting across users. We then wanted to see, to validate whether we could really interpret it as habit, whether more frequent posters differed in their parameters. And we found that indeed people who posted more frequently had a higher habit weight, indicating greater reliance on a habitual system, and a lower action learning rate, indicating kind of more consistent posting over time, also consistent with habit. We didn't find a relationship we expected with reward learning rate. Thank you so much. I just want to say a big thank you mostly to my PhD supervisor, Amy Orban, and Stefano Palmentari, who co-supervised this project, and all of our other collaborators as well. Check out the preprint and come say hi, like in the poster session.
Maybe we have time for one question. All right, now we have Isaac Ray Christian from Princeton University, Hierarchical Systems and the Default Mode Network when reasoning about self and other mental states.
All right, what is up, everyone? My name is Isaac Christian. I work with Michael Graziano and Uri Hassan, but this is a project I conducted with Sam Nastase, who was just hired at USC, so go Sam. And I'm excited to present this work to you today, which is probably the most unconventional and maybe creative project of my PhD. Okay. So humans exhibit an exceptional ability to reason about minds. For instance, we use social cues, such as where someone is paying attention, to determine what it is that that person is thinking about. And similarly, we can also introspect, asking what is it that I am paying attention to, and use this information to make decisions, such as should I continue to scroll cute cat videos on TikTok endlessly, or get back on task because you must graduate at some point. And so what is the same across both tasks? Well, there's this inference on a hidden mental state. And what differs? Well, both tasks, or the subject of the task and the type of cue sort of differ between the two. So in this study, we sought to identify these two processes using fMRI, and we hypothesized that some regions in the brain would exhibit sensitivity to the process of mental state reasoning irrespective of the target actor, while other regions might encode and track the identity of actors during the reasoning process. Okay, so we created this novel fMRI paradigm, which consisted of 4 conditions. 2 conditions involved reasoning about, or just involved the self, and 2 conditions involved another actor. In the self-reason task, we essentially asked participants to meditate. So we had them pay attention to the rhythmic sensation of their breath and reason about whether or not they were on task. So this involved using the attention cues available from introspection to infer if their current mental state was consistent with their definition of on task. And if they noticed their attention had lapsed, they pressed a button denoting this event and then resumed focused attention on the breath. The self-count condition was a control, so we again asked them, participants to pay attention to their breath, but this time to count each breath and indicate each time this count reached 5. And once they did reach 5, they would restart their count back at 0. And we designed this condition to match the number of button presses in the self-reason condition and instantiate a task that required the same interoceptive attention to a physiological stimulus, but without that second-order reasoning about the signal. For the tasks involving another actor, we displayed videos of actors performing the self-reasoning task or the meditation on screen. And in the task requiring reasoning about another person's mind, we asked participants to carefully examine this actor and reason about whether that actor was on task. So if they noticed the actor's attention to have lapsed from the meditation task, they would indicate so via button press. And in the counting condition, we had participants again watch the same video, only this time indicate every time the actor on screen reached their 5th breath. And so once the 5th breath was reached, they'd indicate again via button press and then restart the count at 0. So we had this fun little 2x2 experimental design, 2 conditions involving reasoning, 1 for self, 1 for other, and then 2 control conditions, 1 for self, 1 for other, that involved counting. Okay, so each of our 4 conditions yielded these endogenous self-paced button presses corresponding to moments of reasoning or counting. And from these events, we constructed general linear models. So we convolved the 3-second period prior to the button press with a canonical HRF function and fit this predictor matrix to bold signal. And then we extracted regression coefficients from the resulting brain map for 5 regions in the default mode network selected using the peak activations from a search of mentalizing on Neuroscience. And from these events, we conducted MVPA analysis, which essentially asks whether the regression coefficients from one condition are linearly separable from another condition. So if the pattern for reasoning is different than the pattern for counting in this particular example. We ran 2 kinds of MVPA models. In the first test, we analyzed if there are regions sensitive to the process of mental state reasoning, regardless of the actor under consideration, using cross-classification. So this involved training one model to distinguish the patterns between reasoning and counting for the other actor, and testing whether that model could also distinguish reasoning and counting when reasoning about one's own mind. And we also examined this model in the other direction, training one model to learn differences between self-reasoning and counting, and testing whether that model could generalize to reasoning about another's mind compared to counting that person's breaths. Okay, on to results. So on the y-axis we have classification accuracy, and on the x-axis the region in the default mode network. And here I'll only point out the most robust results, those of which were significant in both cross-classification tests. And so we see these regions include both the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex as well as the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. The DMPFC, for instance, shows around 57% accuracy on the right side here when training on the distinction between other reason and other count, and testing that distinction on self-reason versus self-count. Okay, so this result addresses our first question, showing that among others, patterns in the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex and VMPFC are most sensitive to reason compared to counting, irrespective of actor. And if there exists a general computation for social inference, well, maybe there also exists this functionality that attributes that inference to the correct actor. And to investigate this hypothesis, we trained a model to separate patterns of reasoning about one's own mind compared to reasoning about the mind of the actor on screen. So no cross-classification, just kind of direct classic MVPA. And here we primarily see a different component of the DMN, the posterior cingulate cortex, that was not sensitive in prior comparisons, shows significant decoding accuracy around 57%. Okay, to sum up, we used this novel task to characterize the components involved in agent-specific and agent-general social processing, and we found that some regions of the DMN are sensitive to social reasoning, kind of more generally, and others distinguish reasoning specific to self or other. And we can interpret these results to support a 2-level hierarchical structure where the higher order processes are more abstract, generalizing mental state inference across actors, while the lower order processes track mental states in an actor-specific way. And why is this cool? I think these findings are cool because they support this interesting hypothesis that representing one's own mind evolved from the necessity to represent the complex behavior of other individuals, as well as this cool recent meta-analysis which found functional overlap for social and metacognitive processing in the DMPFC and VMPFC, suggesting that what links the two is this process of abstraction. Okay, thank you to everyone that's been involved in this journey, and for you for listening.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, that was really great.
Yeah.
So I wonder, at least one of your experimental conditions is actually occurring simultaneously with breath, like your present button when you're counting your own breath. That could potentially modulate the bold signal, right? You would have some level of correlation between whatever cognitive processes are going on and the level of oxygenation. So have you tried controlling for that?
Yeah, we had one instance where we regressed out sort of just fluctuations that does remove some of the signal, ultimately, while that maybe creates some issues with the self-count condition, when we did regress it out, the effect still held, although the accuracy dropped a little bit. So not primarily concerned, but definitely a good point, something that we were concerned about.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we have Manasi Malik, Neural Computations Underlying Human Social Evaluations from Visual Stimuli.
Thank you. Hi, today I'll be presenting my work on how humans make social inferences from visual scenes. So humans effortlessly extract social information from visual input. From this video on the left, we can recognize not only the people and objects in the scene, but also that these women are interacting with each other and are friendly with each other. Humans can make social inferences even from an abstract version of the stimulus. Like on the right, you see these simple shapes as agents helping each other move the ball. Now, while this is such a core human ability, the underlying computational mechanism is still unknown. So there are two broad theories about how humans may be doing this. One suggests that it is largely a visual process separate from mental state inference and simulation. This is supported by recent behavioral and neural evidence. So if humans were using a bottom-up visual process to infer the scene that I just showed you, they would process the input information using cortical computations well approximated by a typical neural network to directly predict that these agents were helping each other. Now, even though these traditional models do really well at many other visual tasks like object recognition, traditional bottom-up models don't match human social judgments well. So in previous work, we proposed a bottom-up model that structures the visual input relationally, and we found that adding this inductive bias allows it to match human social interaction judgments well. We call this model social GNN. Essentially, the model first extracts a visual graph for each frame of the video, which is then processed by a graph neural network, and then information is combined across time by an RNN to finally make a prediction, such as helping. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into more details about the model, but I'm happy to answer any questions about this. Now, on the other hand, there is this popular theory that suggests that social interaction recognition is based on an explicit model of other agents' mental states and the physical world. These are often instantiated by these generative inverse planning models. So if humans were using something like an inverse planning model to infer this scene, they would essentially sample and simulate hypotheses from a generative world model and match this with the current observation to make a final prediction. Now, importantly, this sampling and simulation of hypotheses is based on explicit world knowledge, making it fundamentally different from the bottom-up first theory that I just showed you. So in previous work, we found that both social GNN and this inverse planning model explain human social judgments well. And importantly, both learn distinct representations and explain unique aspects of the human social judgments. This suggested that humans rely on both these kind of computations, with each capturing distinct aspects of the behavior. Now, a key open question is, which cortical regions implement the computations proposed by these two theories? So these are some regions known to be involved in visual social recognition. So there are perceptual social regions in blue here, such as the posterior STS, the LOTC, and also the theory of mind network, which is here in red, such as the TPJ or the MPFC. So one hypothesis is that these regions operate in a hierarchical manner. So perceptual social regions generate a coarse representation of the scene, which is then passed on to higher order areas for more abstract social reasoning. However, this hypothesis hasn't been formally tested before, and one major reason is that there were no successful computational models aligned with each of these theories. But now we can use social GNN and the inverse planning model as instantiations of these theories to test this hypothesis. Okay, so in a pre-registered study, we showed participants videos of social interactions, like the one I showed here, while they were inside an fMRI scanner. We then compared the neural representations of these videos to representations in different computational models, such as social GNN and the inverse planning model, and also to behavioral ratings of these videos, such as whether the two agents were friendly with each other or adversarial or independently doing something. These participants also completed various localizer tasks, so we could do ROI analysis in these regions that I showed you in the brain. So for our comparisons, we use representational similarity analysis. The idea here is that a similar representational geometry between a brain region and a model representations would indicate similar underlying principles or computations. Okay, to perform RSA, we create representational dissimilarity matrices for each of the models. So for social GNN, we take the output from the last time step as the representation for each video. And for the inverse planning model, we take the predicted probabilities as the vector representation. I want to highlight that these inverse planning models are not typically compared with neural representations, and that's one of the novel contributions of our work here. We also explored some alternative representations for these models, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. Okay. We also compared with the human social ratings RDM and a motion energy model as a low-level visual control. So here I'm showing you a group map across participants showing the representational similarity between different brain regions and the human social ratings of friendly, neutral, or adversarial. As expected, we find high similarity in regions like the PSTS and theory of mind regions like nearby TPJ and also MPFC, suggesting that these regions care about the friendly, neutral, adversarial categorization. We also see representational similarity in visual regions, but this looks different than a motion energy model, which shows only high correspondence with visual regions, but not in the social perception or theory of mind regions. Now, coming to our main hypothesis, which was that there is a hierarchy where perceptual areas generate a coarse representation, which is then passed on to these higher order areas for more abstract reasoning. We expected social GNN to be more similar to these perceptual social regions, and the inverse planning model to be more similar to these higher order theory of mind regions like TPJ. However, we see that both these models show high representational similarity in both perceptual and theory of mind regions. This was really surprising, and we found that this result holds even when we do a variance partitioning, suggesting that both these models explain unique variance in both these kind of regions. As a reminder, both these models have low representational similarity with each other. We find consistent results even when we do an ROI-based analysis. Now, from these results, it seems that both perceptual social regions like PSTS and theory of mind regions like the TPJ are doing both bottom-up relational and mentalizing kind of computations during visual social inference, suggesting that there is maybe no strict hierarchy. But there is an alternate explanation, which is that maybe there is a hierarchy between these regions, but there is also recurrent interaction between them. So relationally structured visual information flows up, and this mental state inferences feedback down. And we did some exploratory time result analysis suggesting that this might be the case. So come to my poster to find out more about this analysis. With that, I'd like to thank my advisor, Leila Ishik, and also our collaborators, and many other people who've helped me scan and given feedback on this work. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks so much. We have time for one or two questions.
It's a really great talk. I'm impressed. So have you checked the shared variance between two models and how that is actually represented in the brain and how that is also related to human social judgment?
So we actually, the videos that we showed the people inside the scanner, we tried to select them so that there is like low correlation between the two models' representations. So I think that itself makes it hard to find like reasons where both would be having like high correlation with each other and finding that in the brain. But maybe with like a different subset where there are like more similarities in the representations of the two models, we could find something like that.
Any other questions? Okay. We're finished perfectly on time, so it's 10 more minutes before lunch. Is there anyone who has a question for one of the other speakers before we go? Yes, up there in the middle towards the back.
Do they actually lose focus on the task? It's hard, man. When you're in the scanner, there's a lot of noise going on. It's your first time in there. Yeah, I think on average, there are about 12 button presses per run. So people, they're undergrads, they're tired, they're lazy. There was a lot of button presses. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it really depends on the video. So my brother actually was one of the participants, and he hates meditating. So he was disgruntled the entire time. He was like shifting his body around. So it just depends on the stimulus, I think. Like they're more likely to press for him, but less likely for the other actor. Compared to self, I don't know. It just depends on the external content, I would say. Correct, yeah.
I have a question for you as well, actually.
Right.
What do you think would happen if you got people to look at videos of themselves doing the meditation task?
It'd be trippy, for sure. What do I think would happen in the brain, or I don't know. I think you'd get similar sorts of activations for the other monitor task. Because it is another actor, but maybe the cross-generalization would be higher in accuracy because it's your own mind. I don't know, but it's an interesting question for sure.
I have also a question.
Right
on one of your maps, when you started talking about MVPA, you had a region, I guess it was occipital place area, OPA, that you also had a circle around, but in the following slides, it was not discussed, or it was not in the bar plots.
Right. Yeah, so that was just sort of, that was the univariate analysis. So we didn't, I didn't run MVPA on the visual regions at all. So yeah, I could go into the univariate analysis, or we can talk more about that, but it was sort of a separate.
Analysis.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I see we have one last question before, and feel free though if you want to already leave for lunch to go ahead.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think somebody there. Sure, you can go ahead.
Go for it.
It's actually for Dasom. It's about, that was lovely. So one question I had was whether having the valenced relationship graphs, if you think that's different than a unvalenced relationship graph, fitting a model with an unvalenced graph and valence separately, and then use it as prior work has done.
You mean, for example, co-occurrence versus valence, right? Or
you could model co-occurrence and valence as two separate regressors in your model.
Yeah, actually, in the movie, there are two main relationships: friendship and romantic relationships. But the friendship is mainly based on the co-occurrence on the screen. So, and when modeling the friendship dimensions, the co-occurrence model is better, better predict friendship than valence. So, but for the love dimension, the vice versa. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for your attention, and to our speakers for the wonderful talks. Goodbye.